He walked into her office with nothing but a borrowed tie, a wrinkled resume, and his daughter by his side. What happened next would test not just their courage but her heart. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of kindness, second chances, and stories that stay with you, consider subscribing. Every story here is crafted to move, inspire, and remind us that even quiet moments can change everything. Now, let's begin. Single dad walked into CEO's office with Résumé. One sentence from his daughter made the CEO cry. The revolving doors of Sloan Tower hissed shut behind him, sealing off the noise of the city and replacing it with the hush of climate-controlled air and polished marble. Gabe's boots made soft, uncertain taps against the gleaming floor, each step echoing a truth he could barely admit to himself. He didn't belong here. Beside him, Ellie clutched his hand, her small fingers laced tightly through his. She wore her best dress blue with little white flowers and had insisted on braiding her own hair that morning. There was a smudge of jelly on her sleeve he hadn't noticed until they were halfway across town, and now it mocked him loud as his thudding heartbeat. "Are you sure this is a good idea, sweetheart?" Gabe whispered, lowering his voice as they approached the towering reception desk. His voice cracked from exhaustion, from self-doubt, from the sheer weight of months spent trying to stay afloat. Ellie looked up at him, those steady hazel eyes of hers full of more belief than he could summon for himself. "You promised you'd try," she said simply. And so he nodded, because she was right. Because sometimes courage came in pigtails and jelly stains. The receptionist didn't hide her skepticism. She was dressed in sharp black like a chess piece stationed to guard the gate. Her eyes flicked from Gabe's work-worn jacket to Ellie's scuffed shoes, her smile polite and brittle. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, already reaching for the clipboard that said, "You don't belong here," in invisible ink. "No," Gabe said, "but I brought a resume. I'm looking for work. Maintenance. I used to be a systems engineer. I heard this company was expanding." The woman's eyebrows arched. "Sir, Ms. Sloan doesn't handle hiring directly. You'll need to go through HR." Then Ellie stepped forward. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper worn at the creases and decorated with glitter stickers around the edges. She placed it gently on the counter, smoothing it with her tiny palm. "I wrote a note," she said. "It's for Mrs. Sloan." The receptionist blinked. Gabe opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, but Ellie was already speaking. "My dad's the smartest person I know," she said clearly. "He used to fix machines that make whole cities run. He only stopped fixing things when my mom died. But now, I think, maybe, if he had a job again, he'd smile more." The words hung in the air like a sudden hush after thunder. The receptionist hesitated. Then without a word, she picked up the note and disappeared through a glass-paneled door. Gabe wanted to scoop Ellie up and leave before security asked them to. But he couldn't move, not when Ellie was standing so still, so brave, like this was all part of some quiet plan she believed in more than anything. Moments passed. 5, 10, the kind of minutes that stretch into eternity when you're waiting for judgment. Then the door opened again. "You," the receptionist said, her voice different now. "Come with me." Gabe instinctively looked around, sure she meant someone else. But no, her gaze was fixed on him. He cleared his throat. "Just me." "No," the woman said. "Miss Crew, Mint Sloan wants to see you. Both of you." They were led through a labyrinth of glass and steel, past people in sleek suits holding coffee-like weapons, past hallways that smelled like success and hand sanitizer. Ellie's hand stayed wrapped in his like a lifeline. Then, suddenly, they were in the office. Avery Sloan stood by the window, her silhouette cut against the skyline like a statue carved from ambition. She turned as they entered, her expression unreadable. She was younger than Gabe expected, early 30s maybe, and striking in a way that was less about beauty and more about presence. Everything about her said she made decisions that could change lives before breakfast. "This is your daughter?" she asked. Gabe nodded stiffly. "Ellie. And you're..." "Gabriel Klein," she said, glancing down at the handwritten paper Ellie had delivered. Former systems engineer, currently working nights at Garrison Auto, and looking for something better. Her voice was smooth, precise. Dangerous. Yes, ma'am, Gabe said. I didn't mean to intrude. My daughter thought. He trailed off, the absurdity of it all crashing down on him. Avery turned to Ellie. You wrote this, she asked. Ellie nodded. I didn't know your email. There was a pause. A long one. Then Avery crossed the room and crouched down in front of Ellie so they were eye to eye. You said your dad stopped smiling, she said softly. Why did you bring him here? Ellie shrugged. You're the boss. Bosses can help. Avery stood slowly. She looked at Gabe, and for the first time there was something in her eyes he didn't expect. Not judgment, not superiority. Recognition. She walked behind her desk, then paused before sitting. Mr. Klein, she said. Sit down. It wasn't a suggestion. He sat, heart-pounding. Ellie climbed into the oversized leather chair beside him, legs dangling. Avery studied him for a long moment. Why did you really come here? She asked. Gabe took a breath. Because I used to build systems that made other people's jobs easier, efficient, smart. But after my wife passed, I couldn't think. I took whatever job I could, anything to keep Ellie safe. But now she's watching me settle. I didn't want that to be what she learned. Another silence. Then Avery said, Do you believe you're still capable of more? Gabe hesitated, then answered, Yes. She tapped the glittery paper with one manicured finger. Then I suggest we find out. Gabe stared at her, stunned. You're giving me a chance. He asked, disbelief and relief fighting in his voice. I'm giving Ellie's letter a chance. Avery said, her tone cool, but not cold. Let's see where it leads. Gabe didn't know what to say, but Ellie reached over, took his hand again, and whispered, I told you she'd listen. And for the first time in a long time, Gabe Klein smiled. The elevator ride down was silent except for the faint squeak of Ellie's sneakers against the polished floor. Gabe kept glancing at her reflection in the mirrored panel, still half expecting to wake up. Every inch of him tensed with disbelief, and a flickering sense of danger like joy wasn't allowed to last too long in his life. He wanted to ask Ellie what made her so sure this would work. But deep down, he already knew. She had something he'd lost long ago, unshakable belief in people. In the lobby, they stepped out into the open air. The city hadn't changed, but Gabe had. Something had shifted, however slightly, the moment Avery Sloan had looked him in the eye and said, Let's see where it leads. 3 days later, Gabe returned to Sloan Tower, this time alone. Ellie was in school, a local public elementary where the lunchroom smelled like old apples and the teachers tried their best. He'd packed her a peanut butter sandwich and a napkin she'd insisted on drawing a sun on. So, you don't forget to smile, she'd said. The memory stayed with him as he entered the back corridor of the building where he'd been instructed to meet with the facility's director. The air smelled different here, less like power and glass, more like sweat wires and coffee left too long in the pot. A man in his 50s with a peppered beard and heavy boots was waiting by a storage cage. You, Klein? He asked without looking up from a clipboard. Yes, sir. Sir makes me feel old, the man said, handing him a badge. Name's Wallace. We'll see what you're made of. Gabe didn't argue. He'd been tested before in jobs in grief and survival. He followed Wallace through narrow maintenance corridors and boiler rooms humming with machinery. The building had over 40 floors, state-of-the-art HVAC systems, lighting arrays that could talk to each other, and touchscreen security panels. Gabe recognized half the systems by name. You'd done this kind of work before, Wallace asked as Gabe scanned a misbehaving control panel. Yes, Gabe said, crouching to reset the power interface. Not recently, but this part of my brain never turned off. Wallace grunted. You were an engineer once, weren't you? I was. Why'd you leave? Gabe hesitated. Life changed. That seemed to be answer enough. Wallace didn't press. By the end of the shift, Gabe had repaired 2 malfunctioning thermostats, recalibrated a miswired elevator call button, and quietly reprogrammed a sensor that had baffled the night crew for weeks. Wallace clapped him on the back. "You've got hands and brains. You don't find that much anymore." Gabe half smiled. "I'm just grateful to be useful again." Wallace nodded. "You'll stay on." "Probationary. You report to me, but Monsieur Sloane has final say." At the mention of her name, Gabe's chest tightened. He hadn't seen her again since that first day. It felt surreal, like she'd stepped in for a single act in a play and disappeared before the curtain rose. Still, every tool he picked up, every screw he tightened, it was all done with a quiet determination to prove her right. Not about his resume, about Ellie's. That evening, Gabe picked Ellie up from school. She came running out of the front door's backpack, bouncing cheeks red from the cold. "Well," she asked breathlessly. "Did she fire you already?" He chuckled, kneeling down to her height. "Not yet." Ellie grinned. "Told you." On the walk home, she pulled something from her bag, a folded paper with red crayon drawings. "What's this?" Gabe asked. "I made your resume better," she said, "in case they need a new one." Gabe unfolded the page. It read, "My dad fixes everything, carries all the groceries, makes pancakes with faces, hugs like a champion, still loves even when he's sad. Please hire him forever." There was a picture of a man with big arms, a little girl holding his hand, and a tall woman in a pointy blazer all standing under a rainbow. "She said yes because of you. You know," Gabe said quietly. Ellie shrugged. "Maybe. But she'll keep saying yes if you show her the rest." The next day, something unexpected happened. As Gabe was checking the water pressure valves on the 31st floor, his radio buzzed. "Facilities, this is front desk. Mr. Klein, Miss Sloane request your presence in her office." His hand froze on the valve. He wasn't afraid, exactly, just unsteady. You didn't get summoned by someone like Avery Sloane without it meaning something big, or something bad. When he arrived, the receptionist gave him a respectful nod and gestured toward the executive elevator. The ride up was longer than he remembered. When the doors opened, her assistant greeted him with a smile. "She's waiting." Inside, the office looked the same: glass walls, skyline views, minimalist furniture that cost more than his old pickup. But Avery Sloane was different. She stood by the bookshelf holding a file. When she turned, there was something softer in her posture, still composed, still powerful, but human. "Mr. Klein," she said, "I reviewed your performance notes." Gabe nodded, unsure what to say. "I also spoke with Wallace. He said you fixed a code conflict in the central panel without being asked. I noticed it during a system scan," Gabe said. "It was inefficient." Avery nodded slowly. Then she opened the file in her hand. "Is this yours?" she asked. Gabe squinted. It was Ellie's red crayon resume. His heart stopped. "Oh, she keeps copies. I can see that." Avery almost smiled. She listed hugs like a champion. "I'm not sure how that translates to asset management." Gabe rubbed the back of his neck. "She's thorough." Avery looked at him, more curious now than amused. "Why did you come to me that day?" she asked. "Not to HR. Not to apply online." "Why me?" Gabe hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because Ellie believes in people, and she saw something in you the rest of the world didn't warn her against." Avery blinked at that. For a moment, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who didn't quite know how to receive kindness. "I have a position opening on our systems integration team," she said. "It's part-time, but specialized. Your skills would be useful." Gabe stared at her, stunned. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "No," she replied, "but maybe you needed it." There was silence. Then Gabe extended his hand. "Thank you, Miss Sloane." She took it. "Call me Avery." And just like that, the glass between their worlds didn't feel so thick anymore. The boiler room on the 26th floor hummed with low mechanical rhythm metal on metal heat, pushing through grates, a system always on the verge of needing attention, but never quite breaking. Gabe stood over the circuit map, a faded blueprint pinned to the wall, and squinted through a sheen of sweat. The wiring didn't match the diagram, which meant someone had jury-rigged the panel years ago. He ran a hand across his beard and smiled faintly. Just like the old days, he muttered, pulling out his multi-tool. Since joining the maintenance team, Gabe had worked quietly, methodically. He clocked in early, stayed late, and tackled every repair request with the discipline of a man trying to rebuild something bigger than an HVAC unit. Something like dignity, or trust, or a future. No one talked much to him. Maintenance crews usually stayed on their own floor of the food chain. But by the end of week 2, even the skeptical Wallace was starting to nod with a kind of respect. Guy doesn't just fix things, Wallace had muttered to another tech. He listens to them. Upstairs, however, someone else was listening too. Avery Sloane stood behind the tinted glass of her office, arms crossed as she watched the security monitor. The camera angle showed Gabe kneeling beneath a utility panel on the executive floor, rerouting wires as if he'd been born for it. He moved with precision, not rush. There was grace in it, which surprised her. Third day in a row he's caught an error. No one else reported, said her assistant Rachel, handing her a fresh printout. He's not just fixing problems, he's improving the system. Avery nodded absently. What's he not doing? Rachel raised an eyebrow. He's not talking, not asking for anything, not taking breaks. Avery's gaze didn't leave the screen. That's what worries me. She wasn't used to people like Gabe Klein. Most of the men she dealt with in boardrooms wore ambition like cologne, loud and lingering. Gabe, on the other hand, moved through her world like a ghost with calloused hands. Quiet, competent, unclaimed by ego, and yet undeniably present. She turned away from the monitor. Ask Wallace to schedule a fire systems inspection on 31, she said. Tell him to send Gabe. Rachel blinked. That floor's clean. I know. Later that afternoon, Gabe was in the stairwell heading toward the 31st floor when he heard a sharp, rhythmic clatter from behind one of the corridor panels. It wasn't urgent, but it wasn't right either. He paused, knelt, and removed the screws. Inside, the sensor node had come loose from its housing, its bolt barely hanging on. Gabe reached into his belt pouch and carefully realigned it, fingers working with ease. As he tightened the last screw, he sensed someone behind him. He turned and froze. Avery Sloane stood just a few feet away, arms folded, heels clicking softly against the floor. You don't skip details, she said. No, Gabe replied, rising slowly. Details don't stay skipped. They come back louder. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, brief but real. I had this floor inspected just last week. Gabe gave a small shrug. Then it wanted to be seen again. They stood there in the quiet for a moment, the hallway catching a patch of late afternoon sun through the tall windows. It cast a warm glow between them, though neither moved closer. I used to build systems like these, Gabe said after a beat. Cities, actually. Before, things changed. I read your file, Avery replied. You left the industry 3 years ago. No litigation, no black marks, just gone. He hesitated. It wasn't the work, it was everything else. Your wife. He nodded. Cancer. Quick. Unfair. Ellie was 5. Avery's voice softened. I'm sorry. So was I, he murmured. They lapsed into silence again. Then Avery's tone shifted, becoming businesslike again, but not cold. I'm holding a quarterly ops review next week. The systems team will be presenting. Wallace says you've already identified 3 efficiency gaps our last engineers missed. Gabe tilted his head. You want me in that meeting. I want your brain in that room, Avery said. The rest is optional. He smiled wryly. I'll need a cleaner shirt. You'll have one. I'll have it delivered. As she turned to leave, Gabe said quietly, Ellie thinks you're a superhero. Avery paused. I'm not, she replied, but I remember what it's like to wish one would show up. Then she walked away. That night, Gabe returned home to their modest apartment 2 rooms above a shuttered deli with a window that barely closed. Ellie was coloring at the table surrounded by scattered crayons and a half-finished peanut butter sandwich. "How was today?" she asked without looking up. "Productive," Gabe said, setting down his tool bag. "Met with Miss Sloan again." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Did she smile this time?" He chuckled. "A little." "I knew it," Ellie said, confidently digging through her box of crayons. "That means it's working. What is the fixing?" "You're not just fixing the building, Dad. You're fixing her." Gabe stopped, caught off guard. "I'm not sure that's how it works, Elle." She looked up with the full force of 8-year-old certainty. "People break, too. You just have to look where it's cracked." He sat down slowly across from her, overwhelmed by the strange truth in her words. "And what if they don't want to be fixed?" he asked. Ellie smiled. "Then you just sit with them until they do." In the quiet hours after Ellie had gone to bed, Gabe unfolded one of her drawings she'd left for him on the counter. 3 figures again. Him, Ellie, and now, unmistakably, a tall woman in a blazer with stars in her eyes, Avery. He stared at it for a long time, not because he believed in fairy tales, but because maybe, just maybe somewhere deep in the heart of a steel and glass tower, something human was waking up. The day the invitation came, Gabe nearly threw it away. Not a printed invitation, of course. Avery Sloan wasn't that kind of formal. It was a short message typed from her assistant and delivered by Wallace with a confused shake of the head. "Miss Adrian Sloan would like to invite you and your daughter to the executive pantry for a private dinner Thursday evening. 6:30 p.m. Gabe read it 3 times before daring to believe it wasn't a mistake. He waited until Ellie got home from school to tell her. She was already dropping her backpack with a crash when he held up the folded note. "We got invited somewhere," he said carefully. Ellie blinked. "Is it the dentist?" "No," he laughed. "It's dinner with Miss Sloan." Her face lit up like it was Christmas morning. "You mean like real dinner with her?" He nodded. Ellie spun once in the middle of the living room. "I have to wear my blue dress, the one with the silver belt." Gabe raised an eyebrow. "We don't have a silver belt. I'll draw one." Thursday came with surprising calm. Gabe left work early to help Ellie get ready. She sat on a stool in front of the cracked mirror, humming as he carefully braided her hair. "You look beautiful," he said when they finished. She nodded solemnly. "You look nervous." "I am." "Don't be. She likes you. She just doesn't know how to say it yet." Gabe swallowed hard. "That's not how bosses work, kiddo." Ellie grinned. "Then she's a different kind of boss." The executive pantry was nothing like a cafeteria. Gabe had expected metal chairs and lukewarm buffet trays. Instead, it was a sleek minimalist lounge with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern lighting, and a long wooden table set for 3. A soft jazz track played in the background, barely audible above the low hum of the city outside. Avery Sloan stood near the window in a deep green dress that looked effortless but expensive. She wasn't holding a tablet. No phone in sight. Just her arms crossed loosely, a glass of water in her hand, and an expression that wavered between composed and strangely uncertain. "You came," she said. "You invited us," Gabe replied. Ellie didn't wait. She marched up to Avery and held out a napkin. "I drew your superhero outfit," she announced, "in case you forget." Avery took the napkin with more reverence than most people would have given a diamond necklace. It showed her in a cape, of course, with Gabe and Ellie on either side. The son wore sunglasses. There were hearts in the sky. Avery smiled, small but sincere. "Thank you." Ellie climbed into her seat like she owned the place. Dinner was simple grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and warm rolls served on ceramic plates. A private chef delivered it with a quiet nod and vanished. Gabe could barely touch his food. "Is this normal?" he asked Avery as Ellie chatted about spelling bees and playground rules. "Not at all," Avery said, sipping her water. "But maybe it should be. You invite employees to dinner. Only the ones who arrive with crayon resumes and reprogram my building systems in their sleep." That made him smile. Ellie excused herself halfway through to explore the view, pressing her nose against the glass. The city lights glittered beneath her and her reflection danced beside them. "She's good for you," Avery said softly. "She saved me," Gabe admitted. "After Lauren, my wife, passed, I wasn't sure I had anything left. But Ellie, she kept asking me to keep showing up. So I did." Avery leaned back, studying him. "You're different from the men I usually meet. I'm guessing they don't carry lunchboxes shaped like unicorns." She laughed, a brief, unguarded sound that startled them both. "No," she said. "They carry spreadsheets and grudges." Gabe looked at her more closely. There was something in her eyes tonight, fatigue maybe, but not from work. A kind of weariness that didn't sleep. "Who shows up for you?" he asked quietly. The question lingered longer than either of them expected. Avery didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out toward Ellie. "I don't know," she admitted. "No one lately. I built walls to stay safe, and now I can't tell if I'm protecting myself or keeping everyone out." Gabe nodded. They feel the same from inside. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just honest. Then came the knock. Rachel stood at the door, face pale. "There's a reporter in the lobby," she whispered, stepping inside. "Someone leaked a photo of Mr. Klein entering the executive floor. They're asking questions." Avery's eyes darkened. "Who leaked it? I'm guessing someone in legal," Rachel replied. "You've been under pressure lately about optics. This will light things up." Gabe tensed. "I didn't ask for attention. I know Avery said." But he could see it now, his face in some article titled "Single Dad in the Boardroom APR Gamble." And Avery would be painted as impulsive or unprofessional. This was her world. Reputation was currency. "I should go," he said, rising. "No," Avery replied, but Ellie had already sensed the shift. She stepped back from the window, eyes wide. "Did we do something wrong?" Gabe crouched in front of her. "No, sweetheart. But sometimes the world likes to pretend it understands things that it doesn't." Avery watched him go, her hands clenched at her sides. There was something she wanted to say, some words stuck in her throat like a truth she hadn't dared name. But by the time she found it, they were gone. That night, Gabe lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Are we in trouble?" Ellie asked from her mattress nearby. "No." "Is she?" Gabe hesitated. "I hope not." Ellie rolled over, hugging her stuffed unicorn close. "Then maybe we just have to fix her too." And in the dark, Gabe found himself whispering the same thing he once said beside a hospital bed, beside a grave, beside the mirror, when he couldn't recognize his own face. "We'll try." Avery Sloane stood in her office alone, the skyline behind her fading into dusk. The windows had always been her armor glass and elevation, giving her a kind of detachment, as though she lived above the consequences of ordinary life. But tonight, the glass felt thin, fragile, like someone had tapped on it from the inside and she could finally hear the cracks. The news had hit faster than expected. The gossip blogs ran with it. CEO invites janitor to dinner. Is this romance or recklessness? The worst part wasn't the headline, it was the comments, hundreds of them. Judging, twisting, mocking. She had faced corporate lawsuits with less venom. Avery reached for her phone 3 times to call Gabe, and 3 times she stopped. What would she say? "Sorry my world tried to turn yours into a scandal, but it wasn't just about him. Or Ellie. It was about something she'd buried long before either of them walked through her door, a fear of being seen for who she was underneath the titles and press releases. Vulnerable. Messy. Needing connection. She hadn't cried in years. Not when her mother walked out. Not when her father died of a stroke and left behind a pile of regrets. Not even when she signed her first billion-dollar deal. But tonight, her eyes stung. And still she didn't cry. She simply reached for her coat and whispered to no one, "Enough." Gabe didn't hear the knock at first. Ellie had just fallen asleep on the couch after another round of "Dad, can I draw one more superhero?" and the apartment was finally quiet. The soft hum of the heater and the worn groan of city pipes were his background music. Then came the knock, 3 short, deliberate raps. When he opened the door, he froze. Avery stood there, wind-swept and breathless, her coat clutched tightly around her. Her eyes, always composed, now shimmered under the flickering hallway light. "I didn't know where else to go," she said simply. He stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as though afraid her presence might fracture the space. Gabe closed the door behind her and watched as she looked around the apartment. Bare walls, second-hand furniture, the warmth of a home held together by love and paper napkin drawings. "This is where you live," she murmured. "This is where we stay," he corrected softly. Avery turned to him, arms folded. "I didn't want that dinner to turn into whatever the press made it." "I know. I should have protected you." Gabe shook his head. "You gave Ellie a night she'll never forget. That matters more." She sat down on the edge of the armchair, her posture collapsing slightly as though the weight she carried had finally outlasted her spine. "I built my whole life on control, Gabe. Every meeting, every message, every moment scheduled and bulletproof. But ever since you two walked in, it's like, 'You're breathing,'" he offered. She laughed quietly. "More like I've been holding my breath for years and just noticed how quiet the world got." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I never meant to complicate things for you," he said. "You're a CEO. You answer to people who don't care about stories like ours." Avery looked at him, her voice a thread of something raw. "But I do." Gabe didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he glanced toward the couch. Ellie had shifted her hand, tucked under her cheek, her drawing still clutched in her fingers. A new one, 3 capes, this time, not 2. I wanted to protect her from everything, he said quietly. The grief, the fear, the world getting colder every year. But she sees through walls. She saw something in you before I did. Avery stood again, walking to the window. Her reflection caught against the city lights. For the first time, she didn't look like a mogul. She looked like a woman trying to find the pieces of herself in a life too polished to feel real. "She reminds me of me," Avery whispered. "Not the version I show to the world, the one I forgot how to be." Gabe stepped forward slower now, like the moment deserved silence more than sound. "You came here tonight," he said, "not because you had to, but because you didn't want to be alone." She met his gaze. "Is that selfish?" "No," he said, "it's brave." They stood there in the quiet for a long time. Then Avery looked down at Ellie and her voice changed. "I didn't just come for you, I came for her too. I can't make the world easier for her, but I can be part of the reason it doesn't crush her spirit." Gabe swallowed hard, and for the first time he let himself believe that maybe he wasn't alone in this anymore. When Avery left later that night, she didn't take the elevator. She took the stairs. Step by step, shedding the weight of everything she thought she had to be. She paused halfway down, took out her phone, and did something she hadn't done in years. She cleared her calendar. The next morning, she walked into her office before sunrise and called her communications director. "No interviews, no statements, no spin," she said firmly. "But Miss Crudowislone." "Make it stop," she said. "If they want a story, they can wait for the ending." Then she picked up Ellie's crayon drawing still on her desk where she'd left it the night of the dinner, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that came from PR wins or stock spikes, but the kind that came from choosing to stay, choosing to care, and letting go of who the world told you to be, just long enough to become someone worth being. The pediatric ER was warmer than Gabe expected, bright too, with murals of cartoon animals and balloon decals peeling slightly at the corners. But none of that warmth could reach him, where he sat hunched over a stiff plastic chair, his hands locked around Ellie's backpack. She was inside, fevered, pale, listless in a way that wasn't like her. She just laid down and didn't get back up, Gabe had told the nurse in a voice that sounded nothing like his own. They'd taken her in immediately, asking for insurance information he didn't have, speaking in clipped, efficient tones Gabe couldn't process. He'd signed whatever they put in front of him. Then they'd asked him to wait. So he did, and waited, and hoped. The door beside him creaked open. He looked up, startled. Avery Sloane stepped into the hallway. She was wearing jeans and a blazer over a t-shirt. No makeup, hair pulled into a low ponytail. She looked less like the CEO of a billion-dollar empire and more like someone who had run out the door without thinking twice. "Where is she?" she asked. Gabe rose slowly. "They're running tests." "Flu, strep dehydration, I called in a pediatric specialist," she interrupted. "Someone I trust. He's on his way." He blinked. "You..." "What?" She took a breath. "You don't have insurance. You didn't ask me for help." But I read between the lines. Gabe sank back into the chair, exhaustion crashing over him. "I didn't want you to think I was using you." Avery sat beside him, her voice low. "Then you don't know me at all." He turned to her, the fight draining out of his shoulders. "I can't lose her. I don't know what I'd be without her." "You'd still be her father," Avery said, "and she would still know that she's loved. That matters more than anything." They sat in silence. Then the door opened again. A nurse stepped out and smiled. "She's stable. Fever's down. You can come in." Gabe shot to his feet, then paused. "You want to..." Avery nodded. "Yes." Ellie lay beneath a thin blanket, her cheeks flushed but no longer ghost pale. Her eyes fluttered open when Gabe knelt beside her bed. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered, brushing her hair off her forehead. She blinked slowly. "You brought her," she murmured. Avery leaned in. "Hey, hero." Ellie gave a tired, crooked smile. "I'm still your intern, right?" Avery laughed softly. "You're promoted." Ellie's fingers found Gabe's clutching tight. "I'm okay now," she whispered. "You can stop worrying." But he couldn't. Not yet. Hours passed in a soft blur. Doctors came and went, checking vitals, adjusting meds, leaving behind charts and silent glances that spoke of cautious optimism. Gabe sat unmoving beside the bed, watching the slow rhythm of Ellie's chest rise and fall. Avery never left the room. She stood near the window at first, then eventually pulled a chair close to Gabe's. There was no separation now, not between them, not between her and Ellie, not between who they'd been and who they were becoming. Gabe leaned back, voice barely above a breath. "You didn't have to come." "I know," she replied. "That's why I did." He looked at her, then really looked, and in that moment something shifted, not grand or explosive, but quiet and irreversible. A knowing, a recognition. This woman had shown up when the rest of the world had disappeared. Later, when Ellie was asleep again, Avery stepped into the hallway to make a call. Rachel picked up on the second ring. "You're still at the hospital?" "I am," Avery said. "I need HR to begin enrollment paperwork for Gabe. Immediate benefits. I want him moved to full-time. He's not on contract. He is now." Rachel hesitated. "You're crossing lines, Avery." "No," she replied. "I'm removing one." By the time Avery returned, Gabe was sitting beside Ellie with her sketchbook in hand. He looked up as she entered. "She fell asleep mid-sentence," he said softly. "Was halfway through telling me how you should wear purple more often." Avery chuckled. "She's got strong opinions." "She gets that from her mother," Gabe murmured. "But the bravery, that's hers alone." Avery pulled the chair closer again, her eyes never leaving his. "You once asked me who shows up for me," she said. "The truth is, I haven't let anyone try." And now a beat passed, then another. "Now I want to learn." Gabe nodded slowly. "That's all it takes, you know. The willingness." She looked down at Ellie, then back at him. "I think you both showed me how." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't need to say out loud anymore. Then Avery stood and reached into her bag. She pulled out Ellie's napkin, drawing the one with the 3 caped figures. "I keep it on my desk," she said. "Every meeting, every day, just in case I forget what matters." Gabe swallowed the lump in his throat. You never forget. You just need someone brave enough to remind you." She nodded, pressing the napkin to her heart. "Well then, I've been reminded." And in the quiet of that hospital room, something bigger than fear settled between them. Hope, not as a vague promise, but as a choice. One they were finally ready to make together. The boardroom on the 43rd floor was always kept a few degrees colder than necessary, the temperature intentionally calculated to sharpen focus and shorten arguments. Gabe stood at the far end of the long obsidian table shoulders, squared palms resting lightly against the edge of a sleek presentation screen. He was no longer wearing a tool belt or carrying wires. Today, he wore a charcoal gray shirt, tucked into pressed slacks, a loaner from Wallace who insisted he looked like someone they'd listened to. Across from him sat the senior systems team, 7 engineers, 2 consultants, and 1 executive vice president whose jaw had been tightening for the last 15 minutes. Avery Sloan was not present. Not yet. And that more than anything made Gabe's skin crawl. "Your recalibration suggestions are ambitious," said the EVP, a lean man named Harrow with a tie too tight and a smile that never touched his eyes. "But you've skipped protocol. You're not part of this team. You're not even part of this division." Gabe kept his voice level. "I wasn't trying to replace anyone. I saw inefficiencies, some of them critical. I ran a simulation. That's all." Harrow tapped a pen against the table. "And in doing so, you accessed system-level diagnostics that were never authorized. There, it was the angle of attack." Gabe's stomach coiled, but he didn't flinch. "Everything I did was in the interest of preventing system failure." That HVAC feedback loop on sub-level 4. It was 5 days from causing a cascade. I didn't guess. I measured. Harrow opened his mouth again, but before the words could leave, the doors swept open. Avery walked in calm and unhurried, a black blazer over a soft cream blouse. The room shifted. Conversations cut off. Eyes snapped forward. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood beside Gabe. "Mr. Klein's access was authorized," she said without preamble. "By me." Harrow's face paled slightly, but his tone remained formal. That wasn't communicated through protocol. Neither was his solution, Avery replied. Which, by the way, just saved this company an estimated $640,000 in projected downtime and energy waste. Someone in the room coughed. Another adjusted their glasses. Harrow blinked. Avery looked at Gabe not with condescension or control, but with trust. "I asked him here today because I want you all to understand something," she continued. "Innovation doesn't always come from titles. Sometimes it comes from someone who still remembers what it means to build from the ground up." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Effective immediately, Gabe Klein is being promoted to lead systems analyst for Sloan Corp Infrastructure Division. He will report directly to me." Murmurs flared across the table. One consultant raised a cautious hand. "Forgive me, but does this mean he's managing the team?" "No," Avery said, her voice crisp. "It means the team is about to learn from someone who's already been where our technology needs to go." Gabe felt his breath catch, not from the recognition but from the weight of it. The responsibility. The second chance he hadn't dared hope for. He turned to Avery, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." She smiled, small but steady. "I didn't have to. I wanted to." After the meeting, Gabe stepped out onto the open-air terrace 2 floors below, letting the wind rush against his skin. His hands trembled as he exhaled. The door clicked open behind him. He didn't turn, but he knew the footsteps. Avery leaned against the railing beside him, arms crossed. "You did well in there," she said. "I didn't feel like it. Doesn't matter. You showed up." He looked over at her, searching for the edge in her voice, but found none. Just sincerity. "You really think I can do this?" he asked. Avery nodded. "You're already doing it." There was a long silence. Then Gabe said, "I've been offered promotions before. Contracts. Better pay. But I always felt like I was just trading one version of exhaustion for another. And now he turned to face her fully. Now it feels like I'm walking into something that actually means something. Not just for me, for Ellie, for the people I work with, even for you. Avery met his gaze. There was a softness there he hadn't seen before, a quiet unveiling. "I'm not good at letting people in," she said. "But you didn't wait for an invitation. You just showed up, again and again." He took a step closer. "Because I see you. Not just the CEO. The woman who sits in hospitals without needing to be asked. The one who calls doctors at midnight because a little girl matters more than public relations." Avery blinked, her voice barely a whisper. "That night changed everything for me. For me, too," he said. They stood close now, shoulder to shoulder, hearts not touching, but undeniably aware of each other. "You know what Ellie said last night," Gabe continued. "She said you were already part of the family. She drew a house with a room just for you. Purple curtains." Avery laughed, but it caught on something deep. "I've never had purple curtains. You will," Gabe said, "if you want them." Another silence. Then she looked at him, eyes steady. "Is this your way of proposing something?" Gabe smiled. "Maybe. But there's no ring. Not yet." "Then what is it?" "A promise," he said, "to keep showing up, even on the days when it's hard. Especially then." Avery's breath hitched. She reached out and took his hand. And, for the first time, neither of them needed to say the words out loud. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a new kind of partnership, of a team neither had known they needed, of love, not the kind that starts with fireworks, but the kind that grows from steady hands and soft, unwavering truth. And under the wind of a city that had never once paused for either of them, they stood still, together. The call came on a rainy Wednesday. Gabe had just picked Ellie up from school and was helping her make grilled cheese in the tiny kitchen when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He nearly ignored it, his attention fixed on Ellie's careful slicing of strawberries into heart shapes. But something in his gut told him to answer. "Mr. Klein," said the voice on the line, clipped and efficient. "This is Janet Boone, from Sloan Corp Legal Affairs. I'm afraid there's an issue that's come up regarding your recent promotion." Gabe's heart dropped. "I'm listening." "There's been a formal complaint filed by a member of the executive board," she continued. "They're alleging a breach of internal hiring protocol citing favoritism and unauthorized access to proprietary data." Gabe gripped the edge of the countertop, his knuckles white. "That's not true. Ms. Quarry, Ms. Sloan approved everything." "Yes, we're aware. However, internal policy requires us to investigate any grievance raised by a board member, and in the meantime, you'll be placed on temporary suspension with pay pending review. Please return your badge tomorrow." Avery didn't find out until the next morning. She was in the middle of a strategy session when Rachel slid a manila folder onto the table and leaned in with a hushed urgency. "Someone went behind your back," Rachel said. "Filed a complaint about Gabe's appointment." Avery's face hardened. "Who, Harrow?" He submitted a 6-page memo claiming you circumvented protocol and pushed through a promotion for someone personally connected to you. The blood in Avery's veins ran ice cold. What about the systems data, the efficiency reports, the disaster he prevented, buried under language about process violations and favoritism? Avery stood from the table, ignoring the questioning looks from her team. "Clear my afternoon, and get me security footage from the ops wing for the last 2 weeks." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You think it was more than just a memo. I think someone's afraid of being outperformed." That night, Gabe packed his tools into a canvas bag with quiet resignation. Ellie sat on the couch with her knees tucked to her chest, watching him. "They're taking it back, aren't they?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Instead, he zipped the bag closed and turned to her. "It's just for now. They have rules, and someone twisted the rules to make it look like we broke them." Her eyes welled with tears. "But you didn't." "No," he said, "but not everyone plays fair." Ellie was silent for a long moment. Then, without a word, she slipped off the couch and disappeared into the bedroom. Gabe sighed and slumped into the chair, the silence of the room pressing down on his shoulders like weight he'd carried too many times before. A few minutes later, Ellie returned holding something in both hands, a small pink unicorn notebook. "I have something," she said, holding it out. "I didn't know if it mattered, but I think maybe it does now." He took it gently and opened to the page she pointed at. A printed, still image. Grainy, but clear enough. A man in a gray suit, Harrow standing outside the server room with another staff member holding what appeared to be a USB drive. The timestamp matched the day Gabe's diagnostic files had mysteriously leaked without his knowledge. Gabe stared at it, stunned. "Where did you get this?" "I borrowed your laptop once," Ellie said quietly, "when you were asleep. I wanted to make a slideshow of your first day at work, like for a memory book, but I saw the building camera folder was open and I got curious." He exhaled a breath that was part disbelief, part awe. "You might have just saved my job." Ellie shrugged. "You said we're a team." Avery stared at the footage on her office screen in stunned silence. She had spent the last 6 hours combing through access logs, door records, and complaint memos, but it was Ellie's screenshot that finally brought everything into focus. She turned to Rachel. "Draft a formal response. Include the footage and the access timestamps. Submit it directly to the Board Ethics Committee." Rachel nodded. What about Harrow? Avery's voice was sharp but calm. "Suspend him. Effective immediately." When Gabe returned to the building the next morning, it was Avery herself waiting at the security desk. She handed him a new badge pressed into his palm with quiet finality. "You're reinstated," she said. "Fully. And Harrow has been placed on leave pending review." He stared at her. "How?" "Ellie," she said simply. She found the truth. "You raised a detective." Gabe laughed, the sound shaky and full of something bigger than relief. "I don't know what to say." Avery stepped closer, her voice soft. "Say you'll come back." He looked down at the badge, then up at her. "I never really left." That evening, Avery visited their apartment for the first time since that night in the rain. Ellie opened the door, already wearing her meeting someone important dress. She held out a cookie in one hand and a new drawing in the other. This time, the drawing had 4 people. Ellie, Gabe, Avery, and someone new, a figure in a gray suit walking away, a sign in the background that said, "Don't be mean." Avery laughed and crouched beside her. "Did you draw that today?" Ellie nodded. "It's called Justice. I asked the teacher how to spell it." Avery's eyes shimmered. "You spelled it perfectly." She looked up at Gabe, then who leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "We're good, because you didn't back down." Avery stepped inside, her voice steady but full of warmth. "None of this happened because I stood up. It happened because Ellie did, and because you didn't run when it would have been easier." He looked at her, heart full. And somewhere between truth, consequence, and crayons they found something stronger than vindication. They found a bond neither sabotage nor fear could undo, because what had started with a folded resume had become a life they were now building together. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 25th floor of the Sloan Residence's Avery's personally designed apartment complex nestled beside the city's botanical gardens. The air inside the building was different than anywhere Gabe had lived, warm, clean, quiet. Not sterile, not cold, just peaceful. He stepped out with Ellie holding his hand, her eyes wide with the kind of reverence she usually reserved for libraries and amusement parks. "Are we really allowed to be here?" she whispered. Gabe smiled, still not entirely believing it himself. Avery said, "It's temporary. Until things settle. Until we figure out what comes next." Ellie tilted her head. "I thought we were already figuring it out." They turned the corner and found Avery waiting outside a door marked 2504, holding a keycard and a clipboard. She wasn't in her usual CEO attire. No heels, no blazer, just jeans, a soft blouse, and a light nervousness dancing in her eyes. "I know it's a bit of a leap," she said, handing Gabe the keycard. "But I had the unit refreshed, new sheets, groceries stocked, and there's a corner by the window I thought might work well for Ellie's drawing table." Gabe took the card slowly. "You did all that. I used to think homes were built with concrete and contracts," Avery said. "Turns out sometimes they start with a promise and a crayon drawing." Ellie tugged Gabe's hand. "Can we see it?" He looked at Avery. She nodded once. Inside, the apartment smelled of lemon oil and something faintly floral. The floors were light oak, the kitchen sleek and modern but inviting. Big windows lined the far wall, and sure enough in the corner stood a small white desk with colored pencils already arranged in jars. Ellie gasped and ran to it, dropping her backpack with a thunk. "There's even purple curtains," she shouted. She remembered Gabe turned to Avery, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." She looked up at him, her voice quieter. "Say you'll stay as long as you need." He hesitated. "Then I need longer than I want to admit." Her eyes softened. "Then it's yours." Later that evening, after Ellie had finished drawing her official first meal here, sketch 3 stick figures eating grilled cheese at a sunlit table, Avery offered to take them both to the garden terrace. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting amber light across the skyline. Ellie skipped ahead toward the fountain, chasing the breeze, while Gabe and Avery walked slowly behind. "This doesn't feel like a favor," he said after a while. "It feels like a turning point." Avery folded her arms, watching Ellie laugh as she splashed her fingers in the water. "That's because it is. For all of us." He turned to her. "You don't usually let people into your life like this." "I know that." She nodded, lips tight. "It's easier to manage the narrative when no one's too close." And now Avery exhaled. "Now I'm realizing closeness doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you accountable to something bigger than yourself." He smiled gently. "She changed you." "She changed both of us," Avery replied, looking at Ellie. "She's the kind of reminder I didn't know I needed." They stood there for a moment, watching the little girl who had stitched their 2 lives together without even realizing it. Then Avery said something so soft, so unguarded, it caught him off balance. "Do you think she'll ever feel like this is her real home?" Gabe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to where Ellie stood and crouched beside her. "Hey, Elle. He asked if we stayed here a while longer. Then a while, even would you be okay with that?" Ellie tilted her head, thoughtful. "Do we get to eat together every night?" "Yes. And can I draw on the fridge? We'll check with management." She grinned. "Then it's already home." Avery smiled, blinking fast as if the wind had caught her eyes the wrong way. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed in her new room, her walls already pinned with taped-up drawings, Avery lingered in the living room with Gabe. The apartment was quiet but alive. It felt lived in. She reached for her bag and pulled something out, a framed sketch Ellie had given her days earlier. 3 figures again, this time under a banner that read, "We fix things together." Avery placed the frame on the bookshelf. "I was wrong," she said softly. "About what?" "About where strength comes from. I thought it was control, strategy, isolation. But it's this: showing up, saying yes to people who need you, letting them need you back." Gabe stepped closer, his voice full of something unsaid for too long. "You don't have to keep holding everything alone." She looked up at him. "Neither do you." They stood there, inches apart, the silence not empty but full of every moment they'd walked through, every wall they'd quietly dismantled. And then, slowly, she reached for his hand. No grand declaration, no romantic fanfare. Just 2 people standing in the middle of a borrowed apartment, finally letting the idea of family stretch enough to hold them both. Because sometimes you don't find home. Sometimes home finds you. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when the 3 of them stepped into Lincoln Park. The late autumn breeze carried a soft chill, but the kind that brought people closer, not apart. Avery held Ellie's mittened hand as they walked past tall oaks shedding the last of their leaves. Gabe carried a paper bag filled with sandwiches and thermoses of hot cocoa, a quiet picnic Ellie's idea. It's called Celebration Night, Ellie explained on the way, because we're all finally in the same place at the same time, and happy. Gabe had looked at Avery then, uncertain if she was just humoring his daughter, but the warmth in her smile wasn't something you could fake. Now, under the golden glow of the park's lampposts, Ellie ran ahead toward a bench near the fountain. She laid out a scarf like a tablecloth and carefully began unpacking her portion of the picnic with a level of seriousness reserved for astronauts or wedding planners. Avery watched her amused. She takes joy seriously. Gabe nodded. She's her mother's child. A moment of silence passed between them, not awkward, but reverent. She would have liked you, Gabe added quietly. Avery looked over. Your wife? He nodded. She'd have seen the fire in you, and she'd have told me not to screw it up. Avery's expression softened. She sounds wise. She was, and wild, and warm. Losing her. It tore everything loose inside me. I didn't just lose a partner, I lost direction. Ellie kept me moving, but I wasn't living. Not really. He looked down as if the leaves at his feet held the memory of that pain. And now, Avery asked gently. He turned toward her. Now, I'm scared again. But not of losing. I'm scared of wanting. The confession hit harder than he expected, but Avery didn't look away. You're not the only one, she whispered. They watched Ellie dance in the distance, her arms outstretched, her scarf billowing behind her like a cape. She thinks we're already a family, Avery said. Is she wrong? Avery didn't answer at first. Instead, she walked a few steps ahead and looked up at the sky, the stars beginning to blink into life above the trees. When she turned back, something unguarded had opened in her expression. My mother once told me that love makes people reckless, that it clouds your judgment and turns you soft. She meant it as a warning. I lived by it for years. She paused. But I've never felt clearer than I do when I'm near you. Gabe stepped closer, slow and deliberate. I don't need you to fix anything, he said. I just want you here when the days are easy and when they're not. Their eyes locked, and for a long moment the park around them fell away. No past, no future, just this moment, honest, fragile, alive. And then Gabe reached out gently, brushing a strand of hair behind Avery's ear. She leaned into the touch without hesitation. When their lips met, it wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It was soft, grounded. A kiss that said, I see you. I'm staying. I'm not afraid anymore. It lasted just long enough for Ellie's gasp to echo across the lawn. She stood a few feet away, wide-eyed and beaming. Finally, she declared, dropping her sandwich and clapping both hands together like she'd just seen fireworks. Avery laughed into Gabe's shoulder, her face flushed. Well, I guess we're not subtle. Ellie skipped toward them and wrapped her arms around both. Does this mean I can call her almost mom? Or is that weird? Gabe chuckled, kneeling. Let's stick with Avery for now. Fine, Ellie said dramatically. But you both need matching pajamas if this is going to be official. Avery tilted her head. That's your metric for family. Ellie shrugged. That and Saturday pancakes. They spent the rest of the evening watching Ellie build leaf piles and make declarations about things she would do when she was grown, like run a company where everyone could bring their pets and their feelings. As they walked back toward the car, Gabe reached for Avery's hand and held it in full view of the world. No more hiding. No more pretending they were something less than everything. That night, after Ellie had gone to sleep, curled against her stuffed unicorn in her new room, Gabe and Avery stood on the apartment balcony. The city glowed beneath them, but neither looked out. They looked at each other. I used to measure my life by achievements, Avery said. Deadlines, deals, projections, but none of that made me feel safe. Not like this. Gabe stepped closer. You're safe here. Her voice wavered. So are you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper, Ellie's original resume, for him. The one that had started it all. He unfolded it, revealing the uneven letters and smudged stars. I can clean. I'm quiet. I don't cry in front of people. I can help. I can learn. Please." Gabe's throat tightened. This was a cry for hope. From her. From me. He looked at Avery. "And you answered." Avery took the paper, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, "She wasn't the only one." Then she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. And in that quiet above a city that had once made them feel small, they stood steady, no longer alone, no longer waiting. Because when love finds you not in perfection, but in perseverance, you don't need vows. You just need someone who stays. The conference room was filled with sunlight the next morning, spilling across the glass walls and polished floor like a quiet promise. The space, usually so stark and intimidating, felt different today, warmer, more human. Avery sat at the head of the long oak table, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in a soft cream blouse and a quiet steadiness that made her seem both powerful and entirely at peace. Next to her, Gabe adjusted his tie, clearly borrowed, clearly uncomfortable. Across from them, seated in neat rows, were the senior board members of the Sloan Foundation and the company's executive council people, who for years had looked at Avery and seen only strategy, efficiency, control. They had no idea what was coming. Avery stood, let the silence settle, then spoke. "Before we begin, I'd like to share a story, not from a quarterly report and not from our legal team, from my life." A pause. No one moved. Months ago, a single father walked into this building with a resume in his hand. Not for himself, but for his daughter. She was 8. Her resume said she could clean quietly, she didn't cry much, and that she could learn. It said, "Please." A soft murmur rippled through the room. Avery glanced at Gabe, who held her gaze with quiet strength. That piece of paper cracked something open in me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. It meant someone believed she was worth showing up for, even if the world hadn't yet shown up for them. She took a breath. Since then, I've come to believe that leadership isn't just what happens in this room. It's what happens when no one's watching, when we decide to care, even when it costs us. Especially when it costs us. Avery lifted a folder from the table and slid it forward. Today, I'm proposing a new initiative, the Worth Project. A program dedicated to supporting single parents, caregivers, and displaced families through education grants, housing stipends, and job placement. It starts with 10 families in this city. I hope it ends with hundreds more. The boardroom was quiet. Then an older man with silver-rimmed glasses leaned forward. "Is this personal for you, Miss Ian Sloan?" She didn't flinch. "It's human." Later that afternoon, as the three of them strolled through the park, Avery barefoot in the grass for the first time in years, Ellie skipped ahead chasing pigeons with shrieks of laughter. "You were incredible today," Gabe said. Avery smiled, her hand brushing his. "I just told the truth." "No," he said. "You told our truth." She turned to him, emotions pooling behind her eyes. "It took me so long to stop thinking that strength meant standing alone." Gabe leaned in, brushing his forehead against hers. "Now you're surrounded." She closed her eyes and whispered, "And finally home." Weeks passed. The apartment no longer felt borrowed, it felt lived in. The fridge had Ellie's newest drawings, and the living room had a permanent dent where the three of them piled onto the couch each Friday for movie night. Ellie had discovered an obsession with 80s music and insisted Gabe learn every lyric to "Take on Me." He did. Badly. One Sunday morning, while pancakes sizzled in the background, Ellie sat at the table with a new drawing. It was simpler than her usual work, no unicorns or flying dolphins. Just 3 figures holding hands under a banner that read, "I knew you'd stay." Gabe looked over her shoulder and gently rested his hand on hers. "Who's it for?" he asked. Ellie looked up, grinning. "Us. But I want to give it to her, because even when she didn't know it, she was already part of our family." That afternoon, Ellie stood in the same lobby where it had all begun. Same security desk. Same marble floors. But this time she wasn't holding a folded resume. She was holding a frame. Avery crouched beside her. "This is for you," Ellie said, placing the drawing in her hands. "It's the final version. I'm not editing anymore." Avery blinked back tears. "Why now?" Ellie shrugged. "Because we're done applying. You're already hired." Avery burst into laughter and pulled her into a hug. Gabe watched Heartful Soul steady. And just like that, what began as a desperate plea in a quiet child's handwriting had become something far bigger. A home. A partnership. A love not built from perfection, but from showing up again and again, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That evening, with the city glowing outside their window and the world feeling wide open, Avery curled up beside Gabe on the balcony, a blanket around them both. Ellie was asleep, her stuffed unicorn tucked under her chin. "Do you remember what she wrote?" Avery asked softly. The first line, Gabe nodded. "I can clean. I'm quiet." "No," Avery whispered. "The last part. The one that broke me." She leaned into him. "Please." He wrapped his arm around her. "She doesn't have to say please anymore," he said. "None of us do," Avery murmured. "We're already chosen." And in that stillness where two broken paths had joined to become something whole, something healed, they sat quietly holding not just each other but everything they'd built. A life, a home, and a love story that began with a sentence, and never really ended. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know which corner of the world you're in. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts about the story. If this touched your heart even a little, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next story we share. There's always more hope, more love, and more inspiration to come. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means the world to us.